Okay, so sometime back when I was about 13 or so, I found out about this thing called MAME arcade machines. So MAME is basically an arcade machine emulator. But then, if you're trying to play an arcade game, you don't want to play it with like a keyboard and mouse or a controller. You want to play it with a joystick and arcade buttons, right? And preferably, you could also be playing it standing up at an arcade machine type of thing. So some people online were building these like MAME arcade cabinets, where you build an arcade cabinet, you put a computer into it, and you hotwire a keyboard so that it hooks up to arcade controls. And over time, things have gotten way more advanced and way more simplified for building these sort of arcade machines. But back when I was first looking into it, you had to like hotwire a keyboard or hotwire a USB game controller. Then when you press the arcade button or you move the joystick, the inputs from that button are just clicking a keyboard key, which then in a computer, you have an arcade machine emulator, which is a really cool project. And when I was younger, I was like very interested. I've said in the past that when I was a little kid, I had a YouTube channel where I would review video games. So I was pretty interested in video games, and there was one YouTuber called Wii Viewer, and he reviewed Wii games, but he also had an arcade machine in his house. I forget what it's called. Let me look it up. What is that arcade machine called? Okay, I found it. It was called a Play Choice 10. So a Play Choice 10 was this arcade machine that you could put NES games into the arcade machine and it would play them. I think something like that. I don't know if you actually put the NES game cartridge into the arcade machine, but I think that's how it worked. Okay, so Future Mustard here. I just looked it up. Turns out, no, they weren't the original NES cartridges, but you could add your own cartridges and you could swap them out. They had special expansion carts containing usually unmodified NES games. But it did have an original list of games, and I'll show those games so that you know what games the system came with. Anyways, so that YouTube channel, I seen that arcade machine, and it was a start of a small obsession with arcade machines, and I started to really look into all of the different types of arcade machines. I found out that there's this one arcade machine where basically, if you don't know this, basically before they had DVD and I think before VHS, Future Mustard here again, it actually came out 2 years after VHS, and they were in kind of a competition. So, same time. They had this thing called Laserdisc, and Laserdisc is before my time, but it was basically like it looked like like a vinyl record, but it was like a DVD. I don't know how old you are, the current viewer watching this video, but there used to be DVD menus and menu games. There used to be games in those menus. They don't have this on Netflix anymore. What am I saying anymore? They don't have this these days with Netflix. Netflix should have some games. If they need to start releasing them with games or something. Maybe Blu-rays have games and we're just missing out. That's where the true AAA games are on the Blu-ray menu games. Anyways, what am I saying? But yeah, so there was Laserdisc, and at some point there was an arcade machine that was made by an artist. I mean, I don't know, there's probably a lot of people that went into making this thing, but they took an artist from Disney and they created basically a Disney movie that you could play through using the technology of a Laserdisc, which was very similar to like a DVD. So if you know anything about DVD games, the way that they work is generally, it's very similar to like a Flash game, honestly. Picture like the most simplest Flash games. Basically, the way that they would work is it might take an input from the player, but for the most part, it's just playing you a video. For example, in old Flash games, when it would show like a loading bar, it was almost always just a facade. It was almost always just a fake loading bar animation, just to give the feeling that you're loading something. Going off on a bit of a tangent here, I suppose, but basically the Laserdisc would play a Disney movie, and then you could control the arcade controls, and if you pressed the right buttons at the right time, it would continue that movie, essentially. And if you pressed the wrong button, then it would play a different movie, which would be you losing. And I think that there was only about 10 games or so that worked in this way, But interestingly enough, so I said earlier that there was a MAME arcade machine emulator, which is a multi-arcade machine emulator, which covers like a lot of different arcade games. Tons of different arcade games are emulated through that emulator, and they're all played perfectly. However, these Laserdisc games, for example, is one example of a type of arcade game that is just a little bit too unique of a technology, where there's an entirely different emulator for that game, right? An entirely different emulator for all of those games that require Laserdisc. And I'm pretty sure that the emulator is called Daphne. And the most common game of those Laserdisc type of games that is played with the Daphne emulator is Dragon's Lair from 1983. Which, I mean, is popular enough that you probably have seen this game before, even if you have never heard of any of the stuff that I'm talking about right now. And I mean, the princess in that game is named Daphne, which is what the emulator is named after. Just a little fun fact there. Yeah, I'm looking it up right now, and it seems like there is about 12 games that would be played on that. And which, of course, there was also Dragon's Lair 2, and there was also Space Ace, which were some pretty popular ones, so you might have heard of those. But yeah, there's tons of different types of arcade machines. There's tons of different games that can be played with arcade controls, such as NES games and Super Nintendo games. Certain games were almost meant to be played with arcade controls, even though they're meant for a console. Just because of the time that they came out, a lot of people kind of like were still arcade control brained. I don't know how else to explain it. But some of these games that are even on consoles play better on an arcade machine. So eventually you have a whole bunch of emulators for all the different types of arcade games and stuff, and you could play them all on one arcade machine, but you also want to have a very clean menu so that you're not going through all the controls, all of the settings, and opening up windows and stuff on an arcade machine. So then there's other programs called front ends, basically, and a front end the title says it all. It's basically a front for the arcade machine. It's like a main menu, and there's a lot of really cool front ends. I'll just show off like a small bit of footage from one called Launchbox, which in my opinion is the best one. But yeah, then eventually you have it all set up so that you basically just turn on the computer. Well, you turn on the arcade machine, which then turns on the computer. It turns on the marquee, any like LEDs or anything that you have in there. The monitor turns on automatically when the computer starts up. And then you have it set up so that it actually hides all of the Windows logos. It hides any sort of operating system junk. And so all that you see is as soon as you turn it on, it boots up and it goes straight into the front end program, and then you're right away able to select an arcade game or a console or whatever. It leads to a very seamless playing experience. And another really cool thing about it is that when you have a coin door hooked up to it, a real coin door, inside of a coin door, it actually, when the coin goes in, it kind of flicks like a little switch. So you can actually take the output of that switch, almost exactly the same as any other button, and you can also hotwire that. Mind you, like I was saying before, things have gotten a lot more simple. If you wanted to do this yourself, you could just look it up. There is like kits, so that you don't even have to solder anything. You could just plug everything in. It's very simple now, and you don't have to like tear apart a USB controller or keyboard and hotwire it, because they actually sell like little USB controller interface things, and you can just pop in the buttons and pop in the joysticks, like no soldering. I don't know how to explain it. It's very simple now. So anyways, back to my story. When I was about 13, I was very interested in this, and I wanted to build one. But the thing is, I don't have any like wood shop skills. I don't know how to cut wood. I don't know how to drill holes and stuff. I do now. I've learned. Yeah, it was not the simplest thing. So I opted for the route of buying an old arcade machine. Basically, whatever was the cheapest arcade machine that I could find. I know this is going to sound like a crime, but preferably it would be a game that wasn't that popular and was not that sought after. That way I could gut the thing and use it. I know it's a crime. As an adult now, I would never do this. I think that it's just such a simple process to build the thing out of wood yourself. But, being a kid, it was the optimal solution. So I bought an arcade machine and I gutted it, and I got a computer and I set it up with thousands of games, anyways, and then basically every console. I had so many things. I had games that, my arcade machine was set up so that you could play flash games on it and stuff. But the one thing that I never got around to was building a proper control board, because to build a proper control deck, you need to either you could just go buy a USB arcade control deck. There's, I think, one called, I forget what the company's called. It's like X something. They have really cool ones. So the better option, slightly cheaper, well, not slightly, quite a bit cheaper option is to build it yourself. But to build it yourself, you need to have a drill with a very specific size drill bit to drill holes. But I never got around to that. So to this day, I have an arcade machine just sitting around, which I'm going to eventually make a YouTube video customizing this thing and completing it. I promise it will happen eventually. Probably not anytime soon, but it will happen eventually. Anyways, I don't really know what else to talk about arcade machines and stuff, but that's my history with my enamorment, with my obsession with arcade machines. I do think that to anybody thinking about doing the project, it's really fun. I do recommend you play around with this type of project, but if you do build something like this, I would recommend going with the more modern route of building like a tabletop arcade machine or something. Just having a gigantic basically piece of furniture in your house that is almost never used, that is very bright and loud, is probably not the best idea. I think that's all. Also, some people build them to double as like a jukebox, so there's that option. And there's people that build like all kinds of stuff. They build like tabletop arcade machines. They build not tabletop, they build like flat down table ones. I don't know, I'll show a picture. Yeah, I don't know, there's so many different models. There's people that build like jukeboxes that are all digital. Those are really cool. Mind you, I personally was born in the late 90s, so this is out of my time. It's way out of my time, but I still found it to be pretty interesting. Anyways, I think that's all that I'm going to be talking about this for today. Anyways, take it easy. Hope you have a good one.